Hello, this is Paul, and I'm dealing with Platonic poison. That may be a phrase that you're not overly familiar with, but and you can see Plato's Phaedo there, the book. The Bible warns that we not, Christians that is, not be taken captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ, Colossians 2:8. Plato esteemed Socrates and gave a report of his death. It's in the Dialogues of Plato, especially in the Phaedo. My plan here is to quote extensively from the dialogue and show both its poisonous nature and its effect on Christian thinking. In section 65, page 448, we read, and thought, mind or soul, and thought is best when the mind is gathered into herself. It makes it feminine. The soul is sort of feminine, the mind is feminine. Let me repeat. The thought is best when the mind is gathered into herself, and none of these things trouble her, neither sounds nor sights nor pain nor any pleasure, when she takes leave of the body, in other words at death, and has as little as possible to do with it, when she has no bodily sense or desire, but it's aspiring after true being. In other words, when you're in the body, you don't really have true being, but the soul, separated from the body, can have true being. Now, I refer to Plato Socrates because it's sort of an amalgam of the two men. Plato is the author, but he's talking about Socrates, so sometimes you can say Plato or Socrates, whatever. So I sometimes abbreviate just PS. They're amalgams of these two men. Plato was like a pupil of Socrates. And they are referring here to the soul as is shown in what follows. Just a little bit past where I just read. And in this the philosopher dishonors the body. His soul runs away from his body and desires to be alone and by herself. Notice the last two words in the previous slide, true being. The soul can go after true being. In other words, when you're in the body, you don't have true being. The idea is that true being can be attained if it unloads the prisoning body. But God made the body good, and it is slander against him to describe his work as bad. Second, and more importantly, this philosophy aligns with the satanic lie that humans never really die after all. The intimation may be that God was wrong and Satan right. According to Plato Socrates, no good philosopher ever really does, but actually enters into a more desirable state, that of true being, soul minus the imprisoning body. Plato Socrates were deluded, and the devil would love us to think he, back there in Genesis 3, told the truth, and that it was God who was untrue. In section 70, we read, quote, suppose we consider the question whether the souls of men after death are or are not in the world below. There comes into my mind an ancient doctrine which affirms that they go from hence into the other world, and returning hither are born again from the dead. Now, if it be true that the living come from the dead, then our souls must exist in the other world, for if not, how could they have been born again? So, Plato, Socrates referred this as ancient doctrine. Did he get it directly or indirectly from the Egyptians? I think Pythagoras, Greek, got some of his ideas from the Egyptians also. This is Egyptian religion stuff. You know, the mummies and all of that kind of stuff. In any case, Plato, Socrates seem to consider reincarnation as a proper tenet that human souls may come alive again in different bodies after the death of previous body. This is poison. In section 71, Socrates said, quote, "Then the living, whether things or persons, Cebes, a pupil, are generated from the dead and return to life. If there be such a thing, is the birth of the dead into the world of the living? Then there is a new way by which we arrive at the conclusion that the living come from the dead, just as the dead come from the living, and this, if true, affords the most certain proof that the souls of the dead exist in some place out of which they come again." The devil thus is using Plato Socrates to promote the idea that death, which is God's penalty for disobedience, is actually a benefit to man, for death supposedly generates life. This is a lie, this is nonsense and a poison. In Genesis 3:4 we read the poisonous words of the devil to Eve, "You will not surely die." There Satan was calling God a lie. Now Satan was using Plato, Socrates to morph his lie to the idea that the soul will not surely die, and even that a new body for it may be born. The devil also used Darwin, many centuries later, to promote similar nonsense. Darwin wrote, and I'm quoting Darwin now, "Thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of the higher animals, directly follows. From death, all of these wonderful things come." And that's what Plato and Socrates was saying. But life did not come from death. Life comes from life, even Jesus Christ. In section 76, he addresses another pupil, Simmias, and Socrates is saying, "Then, Simmias, our souls must also have existed without bodies before they were in the form of man, and must have had intelligence. Our souls must have had a prior existence, but if not, there would be no force in the argument." So he believes in the pre-existence of human beings. That's more poison. They're trying to prove prior human existence, but each human, body and soul, has had a beginning in time. Plato, who's teaching about the immortal soul later, captivated Tertullian in the Roman Church after 200 AD. Was wrong concerning the past and certainly should not be trusted concerning the future. The sad thing is that Rome embraced the supposed immortal soul concept. In other words, all people are inherently, naturally immortal. And many Protestants today still have not extricated themselves from Roman tradition and Platonic poisonous philosophy. And I point that out in my video dealing with Jonathan Edwards and his famous or infamous sermons, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." There's so much in that sermon that it's Platonic, and he believes, at least he believes, that one sin is worthy of infinite torture and so on. And Socrates is going to talk about that here in Platonic Greek thinking. On page 463, the same section, 462, Socrates, quote, "admitted that everything living is born of the dead." Can you imagine that? Have you ever heard of such nonsense? Such perversion of truth? Imagine, many people have thought that Plato, Socrates were brilliant. But life is not born from death. This is a satanic lie from hell. In section 80, Plato, Socrates wrote, "But if it be true, then is not the body liable to speedy dissolution? And is not the soul almost or altogether indissoluble? The truth rather is that the soul, which is pure at departing and draws after her no bodily taint, having never voluntarily during life had connection with the body, That soul, I say, herself invisible, departs to the invisible world, to the divine and immortal and irrational. Neither Plato nor Socrates, at this point, neither had tasted death. And they're showing huge arrogance about what happens after the death. Neither of them had even died at that point. In section 81, Socrates offered this about souls deemed unworthy. But the soul which has been polluted and is impure at the time of her departure, and is the companion and servant of the body always, is depressed and dragged down again into the visible world, because she is afraid of the invisible and of the world below, prowling about tombs and sepulchres, near which, as they tell us, are seen certain ghostly apparitions of souls which have not departed pure, but are cloyed with sight and therefore visible, and these must be the souls not of the good, but of the evil, which are compelled to wander about such places in payment of the penalty of their former evil life. And they continue to wander until through the craving after the corporal which never relieves them, they are imprisoned finally in another body, and they may be supposed to find their prisons in the same natures which they have had in their former lives. Consistently, Plato, Socrates refer to the soul as feminine. Why should men have female souls? 2. We read stories about ghosts around the tombs, etc. The authors of those stories, indirectly at least, seem to have swallowed the poison from Socrates' cup. Imagine the human body is a prison. What a slander against the maker of our fabulous bodies. Instead of Satan telling Eve that she won't die, now he tells the gullible the same lie refurbished, that we should even want to die. Why? To get rid of our prisoning bodies so that we may be released to experience real life. Immortality, released from bondage. Lies. This is lies. In the same section, the lie that some souls may pass into asses and animals of that sort, like wolves, hawks, and kites, is offered. Some may even become, quote, bees or wasps or ants, or go back again into the form of man. Imagine these supposedly brilliant philosophers, Plato and Socrates, speculating about our eventually becoming bees and ants. This is another fairy tale for adults. Philosophers, and I've got some pictures there. In fact, the one on the extreme right there is Nietzsche, and I have another video about that he's proven false. The one on the left there is, I guess, either Plato or Socrates, and down below you have all three. You've got Plato, you've got Socrates, and you've got, I think it's Aristotle, maybe. Philosophers are supposedly good, according to Plato, Socrates. He wrote that, and I'm quoting, "They who have any care of their souls, and do not merely live molding and fashioning the body, say farewell to all this. They will not walk in the ways of the blind. When philosophy also offers them purification and release from evil, they feel that they ought not to resist her influence, and whither she leads they turn and follow." In other words, to his young pupils, lads, if you want to be pure, become like me. Be released from evil. Take the cup of death to your lips and drink it, all for freedom's sake. You don't need the one promised at the beginning. That's Genesis 3, the seed of the woman would come. That's a promise of Christ. You can save yourselves by becoming philosophers like me and eliminating your body. The devil told Eve she wouldn't die, but now tells young men that the only way to really live is to die, to put off the prisoning body. Finally, in section 105, he asks the pupil, Sebes, "And does the soul admit of death?" Sebes answered, "No." Socrates responded, "Then the soul is immortal?" "Yes," said Sebes. And Socrates asked, And may we say that this has been proven? And the answer given, yes, abundantly proven. Socrates, he savagely replied. In other words, the soul of man is immortal, especially if you're a philosopher. The Lord Jesus, however, who came in fulfillment of Genesis 3:15, already referred to, taught that the soul of man may be destroyed. There it is in Matthew 10:28. Jesus experienced death. Socrates, when he was speaking to the pupils, had an experience death, and Plato had an experience when he was writing. But Jesus actually experienced death, and his body was raised from death. Both Plato and Socrates died, and so far neither has come back from death. They will, however, Jesus said in John 5, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all," that includes Socrates and Plato, "all who are in the tombs will hear Jesus' voice and come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment." In section 113, we have Socrates or Plato writing, "But those who appear to be incurable by reason of the greatness of their crimes, who have committed many and terrible deeds of sacrilege, murders, foul and violent, or the like, such are hurled into Tartarus," which is roughly equivalent to hell, "are hurled into Tartarus, which is their suitable destiny, and they never come out." So there is Socrates saying that when you go to Tartarus, some will never come out. It's unending conscious torment or whatever. Tartarus seems roughly equivalent to hell, but note that they also, Socrates taught, for at least for some, unending punishments. Now, many Christians have been misguided indirectly by Greek philosophy and more directly by faulty Roman doctrine. But Jesus taught proportional punishments in Luke 12 and eventual extinction. It is sad, however, that this Greek thinking has entered Christian thinking. And there are two books that I've written. The first one in green is about the Greek word aionios, often mistranslated everlasting or forever, and it means lasting, and the durational aspect of the word is not definite. And in the second book there that I wrote, it's dealing with the Old Testament Hebrew word olam, 439 of them. For example, supposedly Jonah was olam in the belly of the whale. Well, that's ridiculous to say he was there everlastingly. He was there 3 days and 3 nights. And here's a lasting Bible that corrects those mistranslated Greek and Hebrew words. Plato wrote, "Those again who have committed crimes which, although great, are not irremediable, who in a moment of anger, for example, have done violence to a father or mother and have repented for the remainder of their lives, or who have taken the life of another under like extenuating circumstances, these are plunged into Tartarus, the pains of which they are compelled to undergo for a year. But at the end of the year the wave casts them forth, and there they lift up their voices and call upon the victims whom they have slain or wronged to have pity on them, and to be kind to them, and let them come out into the lake." This is an unfounded hope of salvation coming from mere mortal minds. Victims of crime, in other words, might show compassion on the wicked. The only real hope, compassion, however, is found in the one who went to the cross. Ask him humbly in prayer to forgive you. He paid the penalty for sin on the cross. There's one thief on the cross looking to Jesus, "Remember me." He told the other thief, "We deserve what we're getting, but this one has done nothing wrong." And he looks at Jesus and he said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." In other words, Jesus is the king. That's what it said above him on the cross. He had faith. He turned in faith to Jesus Christ, and that's what everybody needs to do. In section 114, Socrates, "Those too who have been preeminent for holiness of life, are released from this earthly prison and go to their pure home which is above, and dwell in the pure earth. And of these, such as have duly purified themselves with philosophy, not with the blood of Christ. You purify yourself with philosophy. Live henceforth altogether without body in mansions fairer still, which may not be described, and of which the time would fail me to tell. According to Plato, Socrates, philosophy can save. The delusion is that we humans can save ourselves, but this is a poisonous lie. We can't save ourselves. The Bible says of Jesus that, quote, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Acts 4. Why not pray to him right now?